Yes.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mindful Leadership Beyond Borders with Betska, the Guru, Coach, and Raj, and our esteemed guest, Samuel J. Levine. And before we paused, Samuel, we were in discussion about Joseph. Your book was Joseph on the Spectrum, Understanding Joseph Through Torah, Midrash, and Classical Jewish Sources. And I'm fascinated that as a professor that you dove into this research. I think that's so interesting that you did that, and I'm glad you did. I think that's really awesome. My question though is how does this research, how does this book, how does it affect us today, do you think? Jewish people, non-Jewish people?
Another great question. Thank you. And I think one of the important takeaways from this reading of the story, from this understanding of the episodes, the encounters, the events that happen to Joseph in many ways, because things happen to him. He experiences very unfortunate, to say the least, often traumatic experiences, typically because other people don't understand him, and they often take unfair advantage of him. And again, without getting to all the details of the story, if you're familiar, and I know many listeners, many readers are familiar, whether it's from the biblical text, studying the Bible, seeing the plays or the movies, or just having a sense of the story. His brothers, as we've mentioned, are really upset with him. His father loves him very clearly, but he's still not sure how to navigate, how to handle these disputes between Joseph and his brothers. Ultimately, they sell him to slavery in Egypt, as we mentioned. And in Egypt, once again, he has these very difficult encounters based on his own misunderstandings of others and others' misunderstandings and taking advantage of him. So he has this episode with Potiphar's wife, his master's wife, who takes advantage of him. She's the predator. She falsely accuses him, and he winds up in jail. When he's in prison, he realizes he has this skill at not only having these remarkable dreams, but interpreting dreams. So it turns out that two of his fellow prisoners have these very strange dreams. He interprets them correctly, and he requests in a very forward manner that the individual whose dream he interprets for the good, who's going to end up successful, going to end up in the good graces of Pharaoh, of the king, he requests that he remind the king that Joseph is sitting in prison. That request itself is once again quite unusual. And without getting into the details, getting into the weeds of the text, if you read the text, you see that there's something about Joseph that consistently is very truthful, very honest, very open with other people, very well-meaning, and very moral, but he's not always paid in kind. And time after time, in fact, the reaction from other people is quite negative. And it turns out that even though he's done this wonderful thing, it seems, he's interpreted these dreams in such a powerful, positive way, the individual who's now returned to the good graces of Pharaoh, who ends up being in a high position with Pharaoh, he forgets all about Joseph. He doesn't return the favor until Pharaoh has a dream, a very strange dream. He needs someone to interpret it. So finally, this person, the butler, as we'll call him, he remembers, oh yeah, when I was in prison, there was someone there who was pretty good at interpreting dreams. So maybe we should bring him in. But even then, and again, this is very much in the original Hebrew, but I think it's very understandable as well, more generally. He describes Yosef in terms that are quite pejorative, even in recommending him to Pharaoh.
Wow.
And I think at this point, the story takes a fascinating turn for our understanding in terms of the lesson, the takeaway for us, in terms of employment considerations of all things for individuals on the autism spectrum. And I've been involved in, I've studied, I've interacted with various autism employment programs. And these lessons are more generalized as well. I think when we look at accommodations, when we look at trying to build a program to help a particular group, best case scenario is that we universalize these programs and implement these universal designs, as they're called. So what happens is Pharaoh is kind of wondering, well, on the one hand, you told me that this individual who's still in prison, and I probably don't have reason to think much of them. I mean, from what I know, they attacked my advisor's wife. Why should I want to bring him out to be my advisor now? Why should I free him from prison? But you tell me he has pretty good skills, but you also said that there's something about him that's different. And that's exactly the language that's used. Now, let's take contemporary times. Let's say you have a boss who's looking for someone to do a job. And you know that this person can do that job. They have the skills necessary to do the job. We know Yosef can interpret dreams. That's the one thing we know about him. But we also are unsure if we want to recommend him to our boss because he might say the wrong thing. Or he might say the right thing, really, but in the wrong way. We've seen it. Yeah. We've seen him be too honest, too blunt, too direct. And if he says that to the king, what happens, right? Because the king, we would imagine, we think, that the king doesn't accept anything but the highest degree of fidelity and respect. And if you cross the king, off with your head and off with my head too, because I'm the one who recommended you. So he's really torn. So what's fascinating is Pharaoh's like, you know what, bring him in. Bring him in quickly. So I think the first lesson is that Pharaoh looked beyond all that. He didn't care. What's important to him is he needs someone to do this job. Wow. I want to emphasize, Pharaoh's no saint, right? As far as we know, Pharaoh's as bad as it gets, but it's in his own self-interest. If there's someone who can do the job, bring him to me, and I don't care what he looks like, I don't care what he talks like, as long as he has those skills. Pharaoh brings him in, and there's a fascinating dialogue. Pharaoh says, so Joseph, I hear you interpret dreams pretty well. So this is the interview process. And this is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to autism employment, because interviews are often this game that we play. There's a subtext to it. We're not really asking questions. So if he says, so I hear you interpret dreams pretty well, what are you supposed to say as the applicant, as the interviewee? You're supposed to say, oh, thank you so much. Nice of you to say. But Joseph's not interested in small talk. Joseph's interested in the truth. So he says to Pharaoh, nope, not me. God's going to interpret your dreams.
Oh,
right? Now, last thing Pharaoh wants to hear. First of all, Pharaoh thinks he's God. So the last thing he needs to hear is that, and which God is this? This is the Hebrew God, right? Pharaoh doesn't like the Hebrew. So it's the last thing Joseph should say. And you would think Pharaoh's about, I've had it. You think he's going to turn to the butler and say, this is who you brought to me?
And off with his head.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I'm the boss. I'm willing to bring him out of prison to give him a job. And he tells me I'm wrong. And I was being nice. I was making small talk. I was like, hey, let me say something good. I'm reading your resume. Oh, it looks like you did pretty well in school. Actually, no, I got a C in one of my courses. And I'm still upset about that. What kind of answer is that? So Pharaoh actually responds by immediately going into his dream. Immediately saying, here's my dream. Because he gets it. He realizes, you know what? Why do I want to hire this person? Not because they can talk by the water cooler, not because I'm going to go out with them to a game, but because I want to see if they can do the job. So I'm going to do a skills-based interview. Of all things, I'm going to conduct an interview that sees whether he can do the job that I'm hiring for. Not to see whether he can handle office politics, not to see whether it's going to be fun to hang out with him over lunch. So Pharaoh says, here's my dream. And again, this is very nuanced, but the biblical text itself just uses language that describes that initial conversation in kind of softer tones. That opening, oh, I hear you're good at dreams, in a much softer way. Then Joseph, the text says, answers Pharaoh. It doesn't say Joseph said, it said he answers, suggesting that he saw Pharaoh as asking a question. But there wasn't a question. It was small talk, but Joseph sees it as here's what I'm saying. And Joseph, if he sees something wrong, he's going to call you out. And that's
I love
very consistent with
it.
autistic characteristics
Right.
of being dedicated to the truth, dedicated to morality,
Yeah.
dedicated to
Wow.
this is the way it should be, this is the way it really is.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let you get away with it, even if it's to my own self-detriment. And that's what kept happening to Joseph, that he did things that were the right things. He said things that were the right things, and they end up harming him. Well, Pharaoh tells his dream and goes on, and Joseph interprets it perfectly. Joseph can see exactly where it's going, and he even goes further. He goes on and on himself, and he more than implicitly recommends that Pharaoh appoint him for the job. And there too, that's not what you do, right? You kind of you let it sit
Straightforward,
there.
right?
He's just, and Pharaoh doesn't back down. Pharaoh's like probably sitting there calculating, what do I do now? And his response is, you know what? You've got the job.
Awesome.
And to me, that's one of the lessons, one of the important lessons when it comes to not just autism employment. You know, why do we have this notion of an interview being an opportunity for the employer to put the applicant on the spot, to make them uncomfortable, to ask them strange questions and see how they react. Now, if your job is to be, let's say, the presidential spokesperson, right? You get up there and you're going to get thrown all kinds of uncomfortable questions. And your job description is avoid giving too much information, avoid telling the real truth, and spin things in a way that helps the president, for example.
Exactly.
You're a
Yeah.
spokesperson. That's your job. That's not most jobs, right?
Yeah.
And someone who's autistic is probably not the right person for that job because they want to tell the truth. They don't like spinning things. So Pharaoh recognizes, Joseph, I'm not appointing you to be my spokesperson. I'm not appointing you to be the social leader of some kind of movement where you're going to be a politician and you're going to say things that aren't. I'm appointing you to figure out what to do with my dream. And you've just told me there's going to be a feast and a famine. Well, I'm appointing you to figure out how to administer that to save our country. And Joseph's
Wow.
working pretty well. And that's it.
And did Joseph say yes, he would?
And Joseph, it's funny because Joseph, I think, was kind of taken aback. Pharaoh has to keep sort of bringing him back and say, Joseph, look at me. It's almost like, Joseph, I'm talking to you. And in a sense, Joseph was almost lost in those dreams. Like he knew it on some level. He anticipated that he had this greatness in him, but he was just waiting for the opportunity. And each time along the way, there was someone stopping him. And it was that lack of understanding. It was the lack of people having the ability and the willingness to look at him carefully and to find his strengths. And that's the lesson, I think. It's not just employment. It starts from our educational system. And I've been involved in special education, and we see it all the time, tragically, where teachers, school administrators don't see the strengths in a student. They see the problems, but when someone has a problem, typically there's something else going on. There's a root to that problem. And often when it comes to autism and many other areas, there's a corresponding potential strength. So what Pharaoh did was find that strength, find the skill where Joseph can shine, bring it out, and tell Joseph, you know what? You have this ability in you. And you know what? We are going to discount and make those accommodations as necessary for other aspects of your life. So it's actually interesting. Pharaoh gives Joseph new clothes, wants him to have the confidence to build him up. He actually gives him a new persona. He gives him a new name. It's a very dignified name that indicates that he's able to discover secrets of sorts. And he actually gives him a wife. And
A wife? He gives him a wife?
A wife. A wife. He gives him a wife, literally. And
wow.
my sense is what's happening is his wife that he provides for Joseph is of royalty herself.
Ooh,
So my sense is that Pharaoh knows everything that's going on. He can read people very well. He understands all the intrigue better than anyone else. And he's probably suspicious about what really went on. Was it really Joseph attacking his master's wife, or were things a little bit different? Because he's looking at Joseph and saying, I'm a little bit, yeah, I'm not sure that's really how it happened. So he wants someone to protect Joseph because he knows Joseph's not a politician. Joseph's not ready for the office politics. And that's the final, or at least one more step when it comes to autism and employment. Because the story we hear over and over is that there is significant unemployment and underemployment for autistic individuals, in part because even if they get past that interview, which can be challenging because of the way it's typically conducted, the office politics, the unstructured, unwritten rules, the expectations that without telling someone, they're supposed to know how to navigate the politics, the social aspects of employment can be very challenging for individuals on the autism spectrum. So as far as I can tell, Pharaoh's saying, you know what? Let's have someone who gets all that. Your wife will protect you from all of that intrigue, from people who we're sure are going to try to take you down. And you just have to worry about what you're good at. You develop those skills, you demonstrate and shine with what you're able to do.
Wow. You know what is the most touching for me around your story and Joseph, and it's that, and Raj and I are in agreement with this, is that we are strong advocates of telling the truth. The whole truthfulness piece, and morals and ethics and values. And so my last question for you is, and I could sit and I want to read your book now. there's so much intrigue for me. But excuse me. Excuse me. As a professor of law, how much emphasis do you put on ethics and values and telling the truth?
That's a great question. Great question. So as it turns out, lawyers are advocates, right? Lawyers' jobs are never to lie, right? Lawyers have to be truthful. Lawyers can't say something that's not true to a judge or even to a jury. Lawyers can't say something that's not true to the other side when you're negotiating. But lawyers can put a good spin on things. And part of a lawyer's job is to put a good spin on things. If your client is wrong or doesn't have the better argument, let's say, your job is to make the best possible argument that you can in their favor to represent the best interests of your client. And that's something that students sometimes are surprised with, and non-lawyers are often very surprised about. I was a prosecutor, as I mentioned. I teach criminal law. I teach ethics of criminal practice. And individuals who aren't part of the legal system will often say things like, wait, if you're a criminal defense attorney and you know your client did it, can you still represent them? And that's such an obvious question, but for lawyers, it's a non-question because the answer is absolutely. You represent your client, whatever they did, and criminal defense attorneys have the job. In most cases, the vast majority of cases, criminal defense attorneys know that their client committed the act that they're being prosecuted for because their client tells them what they did, because that way they can represent them. So it's a different mindset where your job as a lawyer is to represent the interests of your client and depicting the facts in the way that's most favorable to your client. So you're not lying, but you are admittedly putting a spin on things. You're not being as honest, as open, as truthful as can be.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. And well, as we said off camera, that the world's a pretty messy place right now. And the legal system plays a major role, I think, in helping to bring Joseph's characteristic of truthfulness back to the world, and so that we are not in our egos, and that we are operating from that great place of the heart. Yeah. Makes sense?
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us today, Samuel. God bless you. And so people can order your book from your LinkedIn or Facebook pages, or send an email to you. How do people reach you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. My email address is pretty straightforward. It's Levine, Slevine. So first initial, last name, at Touro Law. So the name of my law school is TOURO, and then LAW, one word, .edu.
Okay.
The book is available on Amazon, so that's an easy way to find
Okay.
it.
All right. I'll make sure that that's on the description that is available on Amazon. Perfect. Good.
And you can also order directly from the publisher. It's Urim Publications, URIM. It's a small publishing house actually based in Jerusalem, and you can order from them directly as well.
Awesome. You are amazing. I am delighted that you came to speak with us here today, to join our show, and come back again. Let's have more in-depth discussions about this. I think you have a lot to offer to the world, so thank you for being who you are.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted as well. I'm honored to participate in your important programs, and I look forward to joining you again as well.
You bet.